Hello and welcome. Today we will address the question of what might constitute an end-to-end process-driven tech-enabled M&A transaction utilizing tools and services already in market. I don't pretend to definitively answer the question presented because there is no definitive answer. As always, it depends. But it depends is really the beginning of a conversation in which we seek to refine our questions to the appropriate level of resolution to arrive at better, if not definitive, answers. This is actually an encore performance. After my initial presentation to the Technology Subcommittee for M&A, many of the participants asked for a copy of the recording. There was no recording, so I will do my best to recreate that which sparked their interest. My name is Casey Flaherty. I am the Chief Strategy Officer of LexFusion. LexFusion serves as a connection point between clients, firms, and legal innovation companies. You are welcome to email me with any questions you have related to this presentation, or if you are interested in participating in a related project, I will describe at the end. I promise we will get to the entire deal lifecycle, but before we do, I always consider it critical to start with why. My why is quality in the form of business value delivered. While there is much talk about how process and technology can save money, which they certainly can, I think we often make unforced errors when we prioritize savings over service levels. Even on cost-insensitive matters, leveraging expertise through process and tech can improve outcomes at scale and pace. No question, cost reduction can be a positive ancillary benefit. But if, for example, AI-enabled diligence increases speed and accuracy, while simultaneously reducing per document review costs, it does not necessarily follow that the optimal strategy is to review the same number of documents just at a lower cost. Rather, a cogent argument can be made that the AI-driven leverage should be used to review more documents. This is an approach Kira founder Noah Weisberg has termed total diligence, in which clients and law firms should at least explore spending incrementally more money to do materially more diligence, because new tech often opens the doors to new best practices. The choices we make in cutting down the number of documents to be diligenced is a reminder that time is often a much greater constraint than money. We frequently sacrifice scale to maintain quality and pace. Deals have deadlines, and there are only so many bodies even the most massive law firms can throw at a problem. This is not just due to the scarcity of properly trained professionals. It is also a consequence of diminishing returns. The marginal value of additional timekeepers declines due to ramp-up costs, the indivisibility of work, and communications overhead. Process and tech are tools to address these constraints. There will always be trade-offs. The trade-offs we are investigating here are among the most painful, because what is true within deals is also true across deals. The genuine pressure to get work done usually crowds out strategic projects to improve how work gets done. Even less available than money, time is the primary constraint, or, more pointedly, sustained attention is a truly scarce and precious resource. But at a certain point, we have no choice. I have a separate presentation on the innovation imperative. It is grounded in the fact that in the ever-evolving market for expert legal judgment, demand is far outpacing supply, let alone budgets. Volume, velocity, and complexity will only continue their unchecked upward trajectory. Finding new ways to deliver excellence at scale and pace is essential. We can't address nonlinear demand increases in a linear fashion without ultimately sacrificing quality. Yet the math is not quite as daunting as it might seem. I will give you a moment to digest the basic arithmetic, and then I'll give you another moment to override your gut instinct to choose B. While you probably haven't completed the calculation, you are clever enough to know that if I am posing this question this way, the answer will be counterintuitive. You, of course, are correct. A more intuitive framing? Once you cut resource costs in half, you can never achieve the same gains again unless you eliminate the cost entirely. The point is, there are substantial gains to be captured from small changes that reduce low-end friction. It doesn't take much. This is true at the individual level, where there is considerable return on investment from even the most incremental improvements, and it translates to the organizational level. Consider the long-term ROI if a small fraction of the treasure thrown at the recent talent wars was invested in process and tech. We know why the dollars flow to talent. There was work to be done today. Changing how work gets done remains a tomorrow problem. But investments in infrastructure tend to endure, And systemic improvements have another key characteristic. They compound. But compounding also happens in the other direction. The time costs of investments in improving operations are compounded by the ever-expanding array of options. LexFusion exists to help address choice overload. Help, not eliminate. Indeed, we owe a debt of gratitude to Chair Daniel Rosenberg, Vice Chair Thomas Romer, and especially Project Lead Will Norton for the subcommittee's stellar tech directory. It's a grand achievement, a great service, and something from which I borrow liberally herein. But the directory's scope highlights just how many options are out there. I will not even attempt to showcase a fraction of what's available. Instead, I will provide exemplars to illustrate broader concepts and help you frame future exploration of what best meets your specific needs. And of course, it would be of limited use even if I could tell you exactly what you should do today. The answer would change as tools evolve and new players enter the market. As my colleague Jay and I recently outlined for NASDAQ, we are at the front end of an accelerating growth curve. Consider that we now have individual companies raising a single round that almost doubles all the VC funding for the entire legal tech category 5 years ago. There are immense opportunities coming, as well as many attendant challenges. While we absolutely need a directory to catalog the ever-increasing options, sorting through those options demands something more. We require context, specificity, clarity, and ultimately synthesis in order to develop an informed and integrated view of where and how process and tech fit into the lifecycle of an M&A transaction. We will commence our journey with the foundations. These are general areas of import that stretch across the entire lifecycle, such that it would be a disservice not to consider them first and in their own right. And while I know the opening slide established our presumption that the threshold consideration of expertise was already met, we must still start with the most important element of the equation: people. Lawyers are people, no matter how many jokes suggest otherwise. Lawyers are people who did not graduate law school knowing everything about everything. A Lexis survey tells us what we all suppose. 95% of hiring partners deem new lawyers not practice ready. The fundamental need for supplemental learning is especially pressing for new lawyers, but extends well into our long apprenticeship, as well as to allied professionals who bring vital multidisciplinary prowess to legal service delivery, but who also benefit from being conversant with core legal concepts and the associated vocabulary to better collaborate with their lawyer colleagues. Fortunately, the M&A Committee has worked closely with Hotshot to create a wealth of rich content appropriate for various levels and various approaches to training, from just-in-time learning to partner-led boot camps to CLE. In fact, it was LexFusion's relationship with Hotshot that was the genesis of this presentation. Supplemental domain knowledge is essential, but there is also a need for training in substantive skills like negotiation and drafting, technical training in core tools like Word and Excel, and multidisciplinary training like project management. Project management is core. All matters are managed. The only question is whether they are managed well. Before becoming a co-founder at LexFusion, and after being a big law lawyer, in-house counsel, and legal operations consultant, I had the privilege of helping Baker McKenzie build out the largest legal project management team of any law firm. I am intimately familiar with, and an unapologetic evangelist for, the material impact a professional project manager can have on a large, complex transaction. And while I will happily preach to anyone offline about the size and shape of matters where a dedicated LPM is the greatest force multiplier, there is no question that the discipline and tools of project management are foundational to the effective delivery of legal services, even absent an allied professional in that role. One product of competent project management should be fit-to-purpose reporting to improve transparency, visibility, and communication, while also, where necessary, driving preemptive course corrections. The cadence, detail, and delivery mechanics of solid reporting vary by matter size and client preference. For example, a friend who runs the outside counsel management program at a Fortune 50 company only asks one question of firms handling smaller matters: is it on track? While seemingly simple, the collated responses allow the client to manage by exception. That is, direct their attention to that which requires attention, rather than expend finite attention reviewing that which is going to plan. Managing by exception offers a substantial reduction in low-end administrative friction and is a benefit of capable project management and the reporting it enables across matters, but also within matters. Good project management leverages and is facilitated by the proper use of platforms. Some of these platforms, like Transact, were specifically built for M&A. Some platforms are homegrown, configured using ubiquitous tools like SharePoint. Some of these platforms, like Dashboard Legal, sit in between, built by lawyers for lawyers, but not specifically targeting transactions. Platforms often incorporate or connect to workflows that can be streamlined and automated. More and more custom workflows are being built on no-code and low-code tools. This is not just a legal phenomenon. According to Gartner, by 2024, low-code application development will be responsible for more than 65% of application development activity across all sizes of companies. Good workflows are almost always dependent on, or drivers of, good knowledge management. Knowledge teams transform local work product into scalable knowledge assets, while also often being the conduit to third-party platforms that help bring to bear relevant information aggregated by other market participants. Like project management, with which it overlaps in many respects, first-rate knowledge management is a true differentiator. Likewise, there is substantial overlap between good knowledge management and a good data strategy. Yet the collection, cleaning, organization, analysis, presentation, and application of data is also sufficiently distinct and impactful to warrant an independent inquiry. Good data strategy is not simply about accumulating data. It is about being purposeful in creating and capturing the right data exhaust and translating it into information. Information is data organized so as to be useful for decision making. Again, the categories are permeable and interconnected. The organizational objective is to drive us towards better questions in the service of better answers. Answers, of course, are not always readily available, especially at the front end of a transaction. We can fill in some blanks at a well-organized kickoff meeting as we start to put structure around the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. While I am a Lean Six Sigma black belt who misses the days of Post-it notes cluttering the walls of conference rooms, even I must concede that virtual whiteboarding technology has come considerable lengths and is particularly well suited to the hybrid work era. One output that should result from a kickoff meeting is a more refined matter scope based on the best available information, filtered through human expert judgment, and supplemented by quality data from past similar matters. Once scoped, a matter must be resourced. Resourcing is in part about finding available bodies, an exercise that often benefits from an allocation system when matter requirements extend beyond core teams that consistently work together. But resourcing more complex matters that span practice groups and geographies often requires not just work allocation systems, but expertise management systems that enable firms to assemble the right skill sets in the right locations. For the largest matters, expertise management can extend beyond the walls of the firm to include correspondent counsel in jurisdictions where a firm has no presence but one is required to get the deal done. A matter that is scoped and resourced can be budgeted. Even flat fee arrangements are underpinned by an internal costing exercise that includes labor estimates. We aim to arrive at a budget that is not just a prediction but a plan. But while nearly every matter will confound our expectations in some respect, a plan serves as a reference point for understanding and communicating unanticipated deviations, positive and negative. A plan contains the shared assumptions against which a matter should be tracked. Progress versus budget can and should be combined with substantive status tracking and vigilant monitoring for scope creep. The more complete the picture, the better the opportunity to manage and exceed client expectations throughout the engagement. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. There remains work to be done, including diligence, the necessity and pain of which are all too familiar to this audience. Coordinating diligence through virtual data rooms has already become standard operating procedure, but VDRs continue to evolve, especially with respect to the ability to project manage the review process. More granular control enables more fluid approaches to handling large-scale reviews, especially the incorporation of cost-advantaged labor that is itself process-driven and tech-enabled. Some firms have created their own captives, while others are partnering with established alternative providers like Factor to absorb the more labor-intensive and margin-challenged aspects of transactions. Whether diligence is performed in-house or in partnership, human review capacity can be extended and enhanced through the application of artificial intelligence. Indeed, while humans remain in the loop, the AI can deliver robust Q&A functionality, offering an advanced view of the corpus before human eyes have reviewed a single document. AI diligence platforms reduce friction over a large corpus of documents, whereas a key document viewer reduces friction within a single document or set of documents. This friction is inherent in how lawyers traditionally write contracts. Here is a standard contract in Adobe, which is how most of you currently view documents that bubble up from the diligence process, demanding a closer read by a more senior attorney. And here's that same contract with highlights manually inserted by me to remind us that contracts defy being read in a linear fashion. Heavy use of defined terms and cross-references demand incessant page flipping if we are trying to read for the purposes of understanding. This tangled web in front of you is simply a map of defined terms in a standard contract. If the text is too small to discern, well, that's kind of the point. This chart comes from the master's thesis of a frustrated former Bridgewater employee who had to review heavily lawyered contracts in order to advise on investment decisions. He was shocked by the poor ergonomics of endless page flipping, since it required him to print out 2 copies of every contract, supplemented by a heavy dose of Control F. Fortunately, he was getting his master's in computer science, so he was able to turn manual highlighting into this fully automated highlighting, which in turn enables this kind of unrolling of defined terms just by clicking the hyperlinks. The same functionality enables a similar frame of reference for inline reading of cross-references without page flipping. Undeniably, there is all manner of new, exciting, and useful tech at different stages of the life cycle. The most crowded category is up next. Innovations in drafting with the attendant back and forth of negotiations has been a focus for decades. We'll get through it quickly, and then I will pick up the pace, because I suspect, by now, I've impressed upon you not only how many point solutions there are, but also how many points there are in the life cycle where process and tech have an important role to play. We've had variants of document automation available since the 80s. It keeps getting better. Still, the basic idea of structured intake to populate curated templates remains quite powerful and surprisingly underutilized. These systems are becoming increasingly sophisticated to the point where new entrants are part technology, part managed services, with the objective of automating entire suites of documents. The emphasis on addressing entire collections of documents is not simply about initial generation. It is about continuous instantaneous harmonization as the terms and structure evolve throughout the negotiation. Structure is of particular import for the more intricate arrangements where nuances like the proliferation of special purpose vehicles can add layers of drafting complexity. Thankfully, new fit-for-purpose tools are helping us move beyond PowerPoint when tackling visualization. Likewise, even without complex structural changes, the unavoidable internal revisions on top of the back and forth with counterparties demands comparison functionality that goes beyond what's native to Word, with the objective of consolidating into a single go-forward document when you have multiple versions and comments coming in from many directions. In addition to comparisons among versions, we also often want to run new versions against our precedents. Precedent databases are becoming revitalized as they become more accessible through many of the newer tools on the market. The long-term project of knowledge management, making proper use of prior work product, gets closer to realization with every new release. With new products on the horizon experimenting with new technologies like computer vision to push us towards new possibilities. Though the faster we move, the more we break. All that editing can lead to artifacts and errors that need to be excised and corrected. Fortunately, tech can help locate inconsistencies in our documents. There is any number of Word plugins aimed at document cleanup during the negotiation process, though I am aware of only one program in market that identifies errors in both Word documents and PDFs. We're hitting the home stretch. I'll handle these in bulk, not because they are unimportant, but because they are so important they are also likely the most familiar. Again, I'll beat the drum for LPM, some of which you've been doing all along, given the centrality of checklists to so much of what you do. Indeed, while they are evolving into a single source of truth that serve as the logical beginning or endpoint of workflows, many platforms began their lives as automated checklists, and much, though certainly not all, of the platform value proposition can be characterized as checklists of checklists. But boxes can only be checked when items are executed, which is why platforms integrate checklists with workflows like managing closing logistics or the creation of closing binders to provide the means for proper project management. But while I have been fairly bullish on tech throughout, I'll start our final act on a bit of a dour note. Tech is necessary, but it is rarely sufficient, and there are limits to what tech can accomplish, especially without proper due paid to the importance of process. This, before you, is my second favorite process map, because the output is delicious pizza. This is my favorite process map. Same delicious pizza, far fewer steps. To make my point a tad more relevant, here is a process map for old school paper signature gathering. And here is that process with the simple addition of e-signature technology. Not much different. Still step heavy, which is why you can't read it. This, on the other hand, is what the process becomes when you optimize to take full advantage of the tech. We could talk about tech for days, but I'm compelled to underline the importance of process, project management, knowledge management, and data strategy for creating and iterating on a differentiated end-to-end value proposition that fully leverages your expertise and experience. Speaking of the end, some of the most important and most often missed opportunities arise once the deal is done. After-action reviews are standard practice in the military and many industries, but they are too rarely utilized in legal. It is best to articulate, socialize, and operationalize lessons learned when they are fresh in the mind. Deal points are also best captured when fresh in the mind. While valuable data exhaust can be collected throughout the matter lifecycle, the post-close period is where we should ensure all relevant data points have been compiled in a manner that will make them readily available to inform future decision-making. Absolutely, AI abstraction tech can be extremely useful in extracting deal points, the same way it is useful in diligence. But, as with diligence, we still require humans in the loop to get all the way to where we need to be. I recognize what a bitter truth this is to swallow. I know how desperately we all want AI to solve this particular problem, because entering deal points is the last thing anyone wants to do after sprinting to close. It's worse than entering time. Yet, just like having timekeepers record hours to phases or tasks, some manual entry of deal points is part of the price of maintaining a robust data strategy. Whether or not to pursue a robust data strategy is a choice you get to make. But, unfortunately, if you are committed, sustained drudgery is currently unavoidable. I wish I had better news, and someday I hope to. Well, actually, I have a little good news, that in addition to the assistance from tech, a fair portion of the necessary labor can be outsourced. I just don't have good news that the labor can be eliminated. Largely because M&A is towards the extreme end of the complexity spectrum. To take one recent example, an AmLaw 200 firm had to clean 12 years of data so M&A lawyers can fill out 20 fields in order to identify similar matters for pricing purposes. For comparison, the firm's litigators only need to fill out 5 fields. I'd like to tell you that your data strategy will follow an S-curve, with minimal value added at first before really taking off. But I do not traffic in palatable lies. The truth is that data strategy and nearly all of the exemplar improvements I've shared today follow a J-curve. There is almost always an implementation dip. Yet, even this chart, which I love, understates the challenge. The chart I just showed you was wrong in one very fundamental way. It suggested that after you weather the implementation dip, every improvement initiative bears fruit eventually. In reality, most improvement initiatives are abandoned. We're not just fighting inertia, we're fighting gravity. Even if people know the current ways of working are suboptimal, at least the work gets done. And the work certainly needs to get done. I don't believe people are scared. Rather, I know people are busy. Time remains the fundamental constraint. And while I believe upgrading our delivery infrastructure is essential, I will not pretend this does not entail trade-offs and hard choices. There is more to do than can ever get done. It follows that, by commission or omission, some things simply won't get done. I urge you to prioritize strategic projects. There is no other sustainable means to keep pace with escalating demand. For most of us, the best path is to start where we are and concentrate first on small steps in the right direction. To get slightly more prescriptive, I believe that at most firms there is much that can be done to improve on the status quo without fundamentally disrupting it, from LPM to hotshot to coparse. Likewise, while you may be tempted to stress test every tool on the market, finding a suite of excellent tools is likely a more productive play for most firms given their bandwidth limitations. Finally, there is a world where you will follow all the best practices, always have the best tools, and if the right tools do not exist, you will build them yourself. I salute any firm willing to make that kind of long-term commitment to pushing the boundaries of what's possible. We will end the presentation proper where it began, with why. Process and tech are primarily about sustained excellence, about meeting the needs of business at scale and pace in a world where demand is on a non-linear upward trajectory. I hope I have honored your time and attention in tackling the question presented. I warned you I could not offer anything definitive. Rather, my goal was to begin a conversation in which we seek to refine our questions to the appropriate level of resolution to guide our way to better answers. Only you can judge whether I have achieved my aim. Thank you for joining me on a lightning tour of our ecosystem. You are welcome to contact me if you have any questions or comments on what I presented. You are also welcome to stick around as I discuss what we plan to do next. Okay, a bit slower now for those of you who waited for the post-credits scene. I'll start with an important piece of context about me that will underpin much of what will follow. When I transitioned from big law to in-house, I had radical ideas about what I did not want to pay for now that I was a client. Those ideas had absolutely nothing to do with legal expertise, which I considered invaluable then and still do today. My concerns were focused on how that expertise was leveraged through process and technology, or, more pointedly, how expertise was not being leveraged through process and tech. I viewed our delivery infrastructure as an impediment when I was sure it could be an accelerant. So I did something that still strikes most people as crazy. I visited my law firms and watched them work. The lean term for this is going to Gemba, or a Gemba walk, with Gemba literally translating as the real place. That is, the real place where the real work gets done. This was enlightening and, as you can imagine, depressing. I eventually developed an entire process that I called Service Delivery Review, and I built it into a program for how law departments and the strategic law firms could work together on advancing innovation in service delivery. I wrote an entire guidebook on this for the Association of Corporate Counsel. It was a little long. As you can tell, I can be a tad wordy. So I then wrote a primer for buying legal counsel, and my ideas got some traction. Most publicly, they were adopted by Microsoft, as well as privately by several other clients. Most frequently, however, I would run across questions I had written being used in RFPs, including, ironically, when I went back to big law. While there was something edifying about an increased focus on process and tech, clients were not taking the extra step of adapting my general questions to their specific context, let alone adopting a programmatic approach to working collaboratively with their law firms. So I'm determined to try again. Despite some success, I believe my last attempt at encouraging structured dialogue between law departments and law firms suffered from a lack of specificity. The questions were not sufficiently targeted, nor were there adequate explanations of what constituted a good answer. Thus, instead of general guidance, LexFusion will be building out the presentation you just saw into a microsite, including a tech directory and fully annotated downloadable RFPs aimed at different levels of engagement specific to M&A. For small one-off matters, the advice will simply be don't. Don't send a process and tech RFP. For medium-sized matters, the questions might relate generally to foundations and drafting and diligence, and so on. The quantity and detail of questions will increase with the stakes, culminating in a programmatic approach for strategic deal counsel for high-volume clients. While I know this sounds like a lot more work for law firms who are already being buried by long RFPs, please recognize that the objective here will be to create standards, so you only have to answer the question once and then can reuse that answer until the underlying facts change. This standardization also helps bridge the divide between firms and vendors. If we have an agreed upon framework, it will be much easier for everyone, vendors, firms, and clients, to understand where a particular tool fits into the transaction lifecycle. We are working on a prototype site already. When the content is reviewable, we will be circulating it to peers for all manner of constructed feedback. I assure you, I need no convincing. I am quite confident I do not have a monopoly on insight when it comes to M&A. I felt like a total imposter even giving this presentation. Feedback from expert peers will be imperative for shaping the content into something useful. Once the content is deemed ready, we will turn on the comment functionality and open the site to broader community review. After further refinements, we will activate the vendor intake form, which will certainly be among the items that generate the most feedback during the community review process. When the initial vendor intake period ends, the site will be live and on a set refresh schedule. While we might be tempted to continuously iterate, much of the value proposition is tied to the stability of the standard. Again, all models are wrong, but we intend our model to be useful. We'll see. It's certainly worth a shot. And you are invited to participate if you are interested. Just send me an email. Thank you so very much for staying with me all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. I hope it's been informative and worth your time. I can't wait to hear from you.